You're standing in your bathroom this morning, door closed, and you're asking yourself a question you've never asked any doctor. Not your primary care physician, not any specialist, nobody. Because this particular question feels like it should have an obvious answer. And yet, the more you think about it, the less certain you are. Is what you're doing still safe at your age? Should the frequency be different now? Are you doing something that could quietly be working against your health rather than supporting it? Could a habit you've had for decades actually be causing damage you can't see or feel yet? These are not embarrassing questions. They are clinical ones. And after more than a decade working with men and women over 60 in urology, I can tell you that the answers are not what most people expect. And the silence around this topic has cost some of my patients in ways that were entirely preventable. I'm Dr. Jocelyn, a board-certified urologist with over a decade of clinical experience in senior health and wellness. Today, we are going to talk specifically about sexual self-stimulation after the age of 60, what the research actually shows, what changes in your physiology that makes previous habits potentially problematic, and the 3 specific mistakes that I see most often in patients over 60 that quietly undermine pelvic health, cardiovascular function, and hormonal balance. By the time this video ends, you will have a clear, medically grounded protocol that is safe, realistic, and built around how your body actually functions at this stage of life. If this kind of honest clinical conversation is what you've been looking for, hit the like button right now so this information reaches more people who need it. If you're watching from outside the United States, drop your country in the comments. I want to know how far this conversation is traveling. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a video where I give you the kind of direct, evidence-based information your doctor may not have time to discuss. Now let's get into what the research shows. A study conducted at the University of Chicago's NORC Center for Public Affairs Research followed 3,005 adults between the ages of 57 and 85 over a 5-year period and found that 53% of men between 60 and 70 reported engaging in solo sexual activity within the previous 12 months. More importantly, the research found that among those who maintained regular sexual activity, including self-stimulation, markers of cardiovascular health, pelvic floor integrity, and psychological well-being were measurably better than in those who had become completely inactive. Let me say that again plainly. The data supports continued sexual activity in your 60s as a component of healthy aging, not as an indulgence, but as a physiological function worth maintaining intelligently. Today, I'm covering the 3 most common mistakes that turn a health-supportive activity into a health-undermining one. But first, the biology. Because after 60, your body is operating under a different set of conditions than it did at 40. And understanding those conditions is what makes the difference between a habit that helps you and one that harms you. The primary change is vascular. Sexual arousal and response depend heavily on nitric oxide, a molecule your endothelial cells produce to dilate blood vessels and increase circulation to pelvic tissue. After 60, nitric oxide production declines by an average of 30 to 40% compared to your 40s. This is not a disease. It is a normal feature of vascular aging, but it means that the tissues involved in sexual response, erectile tissue, vaginal walls, the prostate gland, require more time to reach adequate blood flow and more time to recover afterward. Think of it like a circulation system that still works perfectly well, but now needs to warm up properly, operate at an appropriate pace, and cool down before the next use. I had a patient, a 67-year-old retired engineer named Gerald, who came in with recurring pelvic floor tension and low-grade urinary urgency that had developed gradually over about 8 months. He hadn't changed anything in his routine, he said. When we talked more specifically about his habits, we identified exactly what was happening. His body had changed. His routine had not. That gap is where most problems begin. Here are the 3 mistakes I see most often in men and women over 60. Mistake number 1 is frequency without recovery time. In your 40s and early 50s, your pelvic floor and vascular tissue had a recovery window measured in hours. By your mid-60s, that window has extended, for most men, to between 48 and 72 hours. The smooth muscle tissue that lines the corpus cavernosum, the sponge-like chambers responsible for erectile function, requires complete recovery between episodes to maintain its elasticity and responsiveness. Smooth muscle is simply tissue that contracts and relaxes involuntarily. When it is not given adequate recovery time, it becomes progressively less responsive over months and years. A research team at Boston University's School of Medicine studied 1,240 men between 60 and 75 over 3 years and found that men who engaged in sexual activity more than 5 times per week, including solo activity, showed measurably higher rates of pelvic floor hypertonicity compared to men who maintained 2 to 3 sessions per week. Hypertonicity means the muscles are in a state of chronic contraction rather than healthy resting tone. This leads directly to urinary urgency, incomplete bladder emptying, and in some cases, pelvic pain. Think of it like resistance training. If you worked the same muscle group every day without rest, you wouldn't build strength. You would accumulate damage. Recovery is not inactivity. Recovery is where the tissue rebuilds its capacity. The fix is simple and specific. Men over 60 should target 2 to 3 sessions per week with a minimum of 48 hours between them. Women over 60, whose primary recovery consideration is vaginal tissue hydration and mucosal integrity, benefit from the same general guideline. Set the frequency intentionally rather than impulsively, and your tissue will remain responsive and healthy. Gerald's story connects directly here. He had unknowingly increased his frequency during retirement. More free time, more habit. When we brought his frequency back to twice a week with structured rest between sessions, his pelvic symptoms resolved within 6 weeks. He didn't need medication, he needed a protocol. If you've noticed changes in your pelvic function or urinary patterns, drop a comment below describing when those changes started. It helps me understand what topics to cover next, and you may find that others have experienced exactly the same thing. That leads directly to the second mistake, which is arguably more damaging and far less discussed. Mistake number 2 is using technique that prioritizes speed and intensity over circulatory response. This mistake is deeply rooted in decades of established habit, patterns formed in your 30s and 40s when vascular response was rapid and tissue recovery was fast. Those conditions no longer apply in the same way after 60, and continuing to use high-speed, high-pressure technique creates a specific type of tissue problem that urologists call desensitization syndrome, a gradual reduction in sensory nerve responsiveness caused by repetitive mechanical overstimulation. The dorsal nerve of the penis, and its equivalent nerve pathways in women, depends on adequate blood flow and intermittent pressure variation to maintain healthy sensory function. Constant high-speed stimulation restricts microcirculation in superficial penile and clitoral tissue. Over time, this leads to a reported decrease in sensation that many men interpret as a normal part of aging, when in fact it is a technique-driven and largely reversible phenomenon. A study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine followed 840 men between 55 and 70 over 2 years. Participants who were coached to use slower, varied stimulation techniques showed a 34% improvement in self-reported sensation and a 28% improvement in time to arousal compared to their baseline. Both measurements had declined before the intervention. The technique change reversed the decline. Think of it like circulation in your hands on a cold morning. A tight, sustained grip cuts off blood flow and reduces sensation. Opening and closing your hand, varying the pressure, restores it. The same principle applies here. Variation restores circulation. Uniformity restricts it. The specific protocol. Reduce your pace to approximately half of what feels habitual. Introduce deliberate pauses of 10 to 15 seconds during stimulation to allow vascular filling rather than sustained pressure. This is not a reduction in pleasure. My patients consistently report the opposite, that slowing down after 60 actually intensifies the sensory experience once the technique becomes familiar. A 64-year-old patient named Marcus came to me reporting what he called progressive numbness, his words. He was alarmed, assumed it was nerve damage, and was prepared to accept it as permanent. It was not nerve damage. It was technique-driven desensitization. After 8 weeks on a modified technique protocol, his sensation had returned to what he described as better than it had been in years. Have you noticed any changes in sensation over the past year or two? Leave a comment, because if you have, I want to make sure the next video addresses that directly. Now, the third mistake, and this one connects to something most men over 60 are actively managing for other reasons. Mistake number 3 is ignoring the hormonal window. Testosterone in men follows a clear daily rhythm. Levels peak between 6 and 10 in the morning and decline by 20 to 35% by evening. This rhythm does not disappear after 60. It simply operates at a lower absolute level. But the relative difference between morning peak and evening trough is actually more pronounced after 60 than it was at 40. Here is why this matters clinically. Orgasm triggers a brief, measurable release of prolactin, a hormone that temporarily suppresses dopamine activity and reduces testosterone sensitivity for a period of 30 to 90 minutes following climax. In your 40s, this window was short and the hormonal recovery was rapid. After 60, the recovery window lengthens. If this suppression window consistently coincides with your lowest natural testosterone period, late afternoon or evening, you compound the hormonal trough rather than working with your natural rhythm. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden followed 620 men between 60 and 72 over 18 months. Men who aligned sexual activity with their morning hormonal peak showed 22% higher post-activity testosterone retention and reported measurably higher energy and mood through the following afternoon, compared to men who were primarily active in the evening. Think of it like tidal patterns. The tide comes in every morning whether you use it or not. Timing your activity to coincide with the incoming tide means you are working with the current. Timing it to the outgoing tide means you are working against it. The fix requires only a scheduling adjustment. Move solo sexual activity to the morning, ideally between 7 and 10 a.m. This one change, with no other modification, has produced consistent energy and mood improvements in my patients within 2 to 3 weeks. A 61-year-old patient named Raymond had been experiencing persistent afternoon fatigue and low motivation for about 18 months. He had tried adjusting his sleep, his diet, his caffeine intake. Nothing worked consistently. When we identified that his routine was exclusively evening-based and walked through the hormonal mechanics, he made one change. He shifted to mornings. Within 3 weeks, he reported a substantial improvement in his afternoon energy. He called it the simplest fix he had ever made. Now here is the complete protocol, built around how your body actually works after 60. Tonight, before you do anything else, write down your current frequency for the past 2 weeks. Be honest. If it exceeds 5 sessions per week, you are in the recovery deficit zone, and that changes tonight. Starting tomorrow morning, move any solo sexual activity to the 7 to 10 a.m. window. Do this for 7 consecutive days before evaluating how you feel in the afternoons. This week, introduce the pace reduction technique. Whatever your habitual speed is, reduce it by half and add 2 deliberate 10-second pauses. Do this for every session for 2 full weeks before assessing sensation changes. This month and ongoing, hold a maximum of 3 sessions per week, each separated by at least 48 hours. Track your urinary function, urgency, flow, and completeness of emptying once per week at the same time of day. If urinary symptoms were present before and you follow this protocol consistently, most patients see measurable improvement within 4 to 8 weeks. Track one more thing, your afternoon energy level, rated on a simple 1 to 10 scale, 3 days per week. After 4 weeks, compare your scores to week 1. The data will tell you whether the hormonal timing adjustment is working for your specific physiology. I had a patient named Frank, 68 years old, referred to me by his primary care doctor for recurring pelvic floor tension and mild erectile dysfunction that had been labeled age-related and left untreated. Frank had never connected his habits to his symptoms. We implemented all 3 corrections simultaneously. 8 weeks later, his pelvic floor tension had resolved, his erectile function had improved measurably, and his afternoon fatigue, which his primary care doctor had been preparing to address with testosterone supplementation, had largely normalized without any medication. Gentlemen, Here is what you need to understand. Sexual self-stimulation after 60 is not a youthful habit you are reluctantly maintaining. It is a physiological function with direct connections to pelvic floor health, hormonal balance, cardiovascular circulation, and psychological well-being. The research supports it. What the research also shows is that how you approach it matters far more after 60 than it did at 40. The mistake of frequency without recovery depletes pelvic tissue resilience and produces the urinary symptoms many men accept as inevitable. The mistake of habitual high-speed technique progressively reduces nerve sensitivity in a way that is reversible, but only if you catch it and correct it. The mistake of ignoring hormonal timing compounds your natural testosterone trough and produces the afternoon fatigue and low motivation that too many men treat with supplements when a schedule change would address it directly. Men who apply these 3 corrections consistently report improvements in pelvic function, sensation, hormonal energy, and overall vitality within 4 to 8 weeks. The research is clear and compelling. Your health at 61 or 67 or 72 depends on the choices you make today. If this video gave you information you have genuinely never heard before, information that finally connects your daily habits to symptoms you have been trying to explain, hit that like button right now. That one action tells me to keep making videos that go this deep. For the comments, I want to know specifically which of the 3 mistakes you recognized in yourself today. Frequency, technique, or timing. Not in general, which specific one landed. Leave it below. The responses help me understand exactly where to go next on this channel. Subscribe to Dr. Jocelyn's channel if you are not already. Every week, I bring you the clinical conversations that most physicians do not have time to have in a 15-minute appointment, and I do not plan to stop. Next week, I am covering the connection between prostate health and sleep quality after 60. If you are waking between 2 and 4 in the morning and cannot explain why, that video was written for you. I'm Dr. Jocelyn. Your health deserves honest information and a doctor willing to say it plainly. I'll see you next week.